Hi, in this video we'll be looking at how to use the Sharperlight command line. The command line allows you to take most of the functions in Sharperlight and automate it through something like a Windows task scheduler. This means that you can run reports and save them to the file system as PDF, HTML, CSV, XML, etc. So here's an example where I've run Excel and I've saved it as a PDF. And now I'm viewing it through the web channel. Here's an example where we've extracted some files and saved them to the file system, and then we've attached them to an email that we've sent out, and we also have a link back to a report in the Sharperlight web channel so the user can view the attachments and also view the online content. These sort of emails can also be sent out conditionally. For example, in the case of this email, we can say that if a certain threshold is reached, for example, if the aged balance exceeds a certain amount, we can send out this email. The command lines can also take parameters, for example, filter parameters, and for example, in this case, we can override the company and repeat the command line for each company in the set, and then email those out or save them to the file system. We can also use command lines for such things as updating materialized queries or even pre-rendering reports that take quite a bit of time to produce in Publisher, for example. Let's start with the command line concept in general. I've googled Sharperlight command lines and I've come up with this web page here, and it gives us various examples of how to use the command line. The idea is that you run the Sharperlight application.exe and then you pass it a number of parameters. Usually the first parameter will tell Sharperlight the type of task to perform. In this example here, we're taking a query that we've defined in Query Builder and we're running it and then saving it in various formats. So for example, we could save the content as PDF or HTML or even a JSON array, for example. There are other examples where we can run publish reports and override their filters, and down the bottom here you can see that we can also take Excel workbooks, for example this workbook here which we have created in Excel. We can use Sharperlight to run that, calculate the new values, and even override some of the cell content so that the calculations are based on a different company or a different period, and then save that to the file system as, for example, a PDF file. Here are some examples of updating materialized query databases where you've created something like a miniature data warehouse and you wish to refresh the data. So in these examples, we'll be creating these command lines and understanding how they work, then wrapping them up in batch files, and then we'll be using Windows Task Scheduler. Task Scheduler will allow us to do things like send out the emails based on some interval that you've created. For example, here we have emails and they're triggered at this interval here, which is every day at 10:30 p.m. and the actions it'll take is to run this batch file here. And we can even keep history about when those events took place. During this video you'll be seeing how we can take these concepts of scheduling and make them conditional as well. So in this example what we're doing is we're running a query that checks a threshold for the outstanding balances for clients, and if they exceed a certain amount it'll raise an event in the Windows event log, which will then trigger the emailing of that email that we saw before, which attached a number of reports saying please take action on this report, and here's the list of clients that require attention. Towards the end of the video we'll be looking at how we can also take these files that we've scheduled to the file system and output them into the web channel so that they're already pre-rendered for us and for example these could be updated daily in the morning or late at night, so that the server is not overloaded with extracting these results. The premise here is that maybe these reports are quite heavy and we don't want to continuously update these live. Let's now explore how to use the command lines and slowly add complexity as we go, so that we get a good understanding of what the command lines are doing. So the first one we'll be doing is extracting some data from a publish query. Because the query is defined in Publisher, here we have a accounts category publish query, and it's appearing in the web. If I just look at the query for that and preview the data, this is what the data looks like. What we're going to do is take this report and save it to the file system in various formats so that we can see how it's working. So the publish query has a group of ACCT, and the code is account code. So we start the command line process by going to Windows Start menu and selecting CMD. That'll take us to the command line. What I'm going to do is paste in a command line that I've already pre-prepared. Basically what it's doing is going to the Sharperlight application directory and running the application called mdapplication.exe. This does all the command lines, and then we have /query execute, and based on the documentation, if we specify its publisher and the code of the report, then we can specify the output file name. In this case, I've got a directory in the file system which I've made up, and it's called my tasks, and I have some subfolders, for example output, and this is where I'm going to save my files. You can see that I've already run this command line a number of times, and I've saved that publish query in various formats like a CSV file, Word document, HTML, JSON array, XML, PDF, etc. What I'm going to do is just delete those so that we can see that the command line is working. Okay, I'm going to hit enter now, and if all goes well, that publish query will be run and its contents saved to the file system. You can see now that the files appeared, and if I double click on that, you can see that it's rendered it as HTML. Let's run that again, and this time I'll change the last parameter to be PDF instead of HTML. And just as before, we've got a new file in the file system which is called account category PDF, and you'll notice that it's slightly different color to the HTML version that we originally did. This is because the publish report, when it's using PDF, it's trying to refer to the page design that we may have created. If you don't have one, it'll automatically create one for you, but I've created my own layout using Report Designer, and I can put graphs and various tables mixed into a layout. So it's used this for the creation of the PDF report. The next subject is authentication. You notice that this command line here doesn't say anything about the user account that we want to use to run this report. This is because it's currently using single sign-on. So in site setup, which is done by the person who's setting up Sharperlight, you can see that I can create named users which have nothing to do with your Windows account, but I can also set up single sign-on based on your Windows domain or local account. So this is my account here. Now because this has been done, I don't need to tell the command line what account to use. It's automatically picking up my current Windows account and running with that. If I didn't do this, I would have to put the user credentials on the command line as well, and you can refer to the documentation to see how that's done. Putting your username and password on the command line's not something you would normally want to do. There are ways to encrypt it, but it's far easier just to set up the single sign-on so that this is avoided altogether. Next, let's have a look at how we can run Excel. and we can override some of the cells in the Excel workbook before we do the calculation. I've prepared some Excel workbooks beforehand. I have one called Customer Age, and you can see there's a number of sheets, and I've also have a parameterized area as well. So to avoid having this parameterized area appear in the final PDF, for example, what I do is I define the print area, and when we render this as PDF, just the print areas are rendered. In the case of HTML, however, it does the whole page. When it comes to parameterization, what we can do is target a particular name range. For example, here I've got a name range called company, which all the other sheets refer to, or we could refer to the cell by its sheet and its cell reference combination. If we were to save this as PDF and there were some sheets that we didn't want to appear, we could use the table view to hide sheets that we're just using for calculations. For example, here I have a sheet called Account Master, which is hidden because it's just used for calculations that we don't want in the final rendition. Okay, let's now run the command line for Excel. You'll notice that this command line is different from the previous one in that we're using /Excel export. Then we have the name of the workbook and the file name that we'd like to save as, for example, PDF. Let's set that PDF file name to be customer aged. We're not going to specify which worksheet we'd like to output by leaving this blank. So let's execute that and then have a look at the file system to see the file appear. So there's the new PDF, and if I view the file, you can see that we've got the graphs and various content appearing in that one PDF. You can see up here we've got the company that we extracted. What I'd like to do now is run this again and override the company so that we get a different company. So this time I'm just going to enter the filter values. The next two parameters are the user and password. I'm going to leave those blank because we just want to use the integrated security. And then we come to the overriding the parameters. Because we had a name range in the worksheet called company, which drove all the filters for the company, I'm going to enter in company and then equals and the company I'd like to change it to, for example TYZ, and hit enter. This time when the report's created and we open it up, you'll see that now the company is saying TYZ. So all these values here will be relative to that company. So if there are other values in the workbook that we wanted to override, we could specify the name range or even the sheet and the cell reference that we'd like to override. So here's a couple of examples of different command lines where we're targeting different companies and even prefixing them on the output file so we can get a list of different companies. And here's the sheet and the cell reference C7. I recommend that you don't use cell references because if someone edits the workbook, they could move those positions around. So a name range is far safer. Let's move to the next step now, where we take the command lines and we put them into a batch file so that we can execute more than one thing at once. And then that batch file can then be referenced from Windows Task Scheduler to be run at a particular time interval. To start off with, let's look at this batch file here called Training T1. Basically it runs a number of Excel workbooks and published content and saves those reports in the output folder under a folder called My Tasks. I recommend that you create a folder specifically for your tasks and then put all the files that are related to that task, and then the subfolders are the outputs for those tasks. So there's my outputs, and I'm just going to clean this folder up so that we can clearly see what's happening. So I'm going to take these reports, run them, and then save them in this folder here using a batch file. And the first batch file is called trainingt1.bat. This can be created using any text editor, for example Notepad for example. As long as the file extension is .bat, it'll run as a batch file. So the content of that batch file is this. Now notice that the first parameter is locating the MD applications exe. This is in the Sharperlight bin directory. Now I've used a variable here so it can be located in the program's file directory, which is the default location. If you installed Sharperlight elsewhere, you'll need to change this path here. But generally that's the pattern to use. And you can see here we've got the /Excel export because we're taking a XLSX, Excel Workbook, and we're saving it in a particular format. These command lines can get quite long, and doing everything on one line can be quite inconvenient. So you can shorten them by using a tilde and then hitting enter and putting a space on the next line. So I'm putting another tilde at the end of that line and putting a space on the front. So what this allows us to do is just break up all the parameters and put them all on their own separate lines to make the command line easier to read. Okay, I'm going to save that batch file, and next I'll run it from the command line. And notice that I've already gone to the My Tasks folder, so I just use CD for change directory. For example, say CD/My Tasks. And if I do dir, I can list all the batch files that are in there. And the first one I'm going to run is training T1. And I don't need to put .bat, I can just type that in. And you can see it's going off, and one by one it's going to execute those Excel workbooks and save them in the various formats. You can see the first few, it's only targeting one sheet. This one's targeting the project sheet, the budget sheet, and the next one is saving as a PDF. And we are running the customer age report, and we're running it for each company. You can see there's the parameter for overriding the company. And so if we go to the file system while that's running and have a look at the outputs, you can see it's gradually building up the content. So previously this folder was empty, and now we have new entries in there. Now if something was to go wrong during this process, we get a number of ways of being informed, but the first one is through the Windows event log. So here is the event log for Windows, and you can just find this in the start menu using Event Viewer. This tells us all about what's happening in Windows, and what Sharperlight does is it puts entries in here, and usually the source will be Sharperlight and then the subcategory, for example Excel Convert. So this is telling us that we took this file name here and we saved it as this file name here, and we did that for all the sheets. For example, if there was an error of some kind, for example it couldn't find this file here, you would probably see a red icon, and for example I couldn't find this particular file. Let's try that now. I'm going to manually run another command line now, and I've changed the name of the file so it's invalid. So instead of doing monthly budget, I've changed it to monthly budget XXX, which doesn't exist. So I'm just going to execute that, and if we have a look at the event log, we'll see that yes indeed there is an error, and it's saying that this job has failed. So that's one way we can work out when command lines fail. Okay, let's have a look at the next example now, which is dealing with emails. So I have another batch file in that My Tasks folder, and it uses a program called Send Data. Now this Send Data is a free program that you can download, and it's a single exe, and I've put it in my tasks folder. And given the right parameters, you can send emails out and also do attachments. I'll just show you the web page where you can download the free application. So if you just Google send email, this is the website, and it's got plenty of examples of how to send out emails and attachments. The beauty of this is that it can be run from the command line, and you can even take the message for the body of the email from a text file as well, or even a HTML file. So it's pretty easy to use, and in my example I'm using Gmail and I'm sending to a Hotmail account. So let's have a look at the batch file. So here's the directory in which I put send email, and I've just used one of their templates where we've got this is the email from address, and that's to, and of course you can do CC as well, and here's that tilde that I was using before, and I'm putting a space on the next line. That's quite important to remember. Here they've specified a SMTP server, which is pretty standard for Gmail. This is the email I'd like to send it as, and here's my password, which is just a temporary one I've created for the time being. There's the subject, and here's the message body for the email. Now I've referred to another file in my folder instead of just typing in one directly here. So I could go and change that file independently of this email. And then at the bottom here I'm attaching a number of reports which I've generated in a previous batch file. So I've got a month, a Gantt chart, and a monthly budget chart. And then this little symbol here means take whatever response we've got from this email and save it to a email status text file, so we know if that email succeeded or not. So let's run this batch file and see what happens. So this will be training T1 send, and just as it did before, we can see it's running the batch file and it's saving the status of that email in a email status text. So if we go back to our My Task folder and have a look at the output folder, that's where we're saving the status. Once it's completed and sent, this file here, the date time should change. So it's finished sending it, and you can see here that the email was sent successfully, which is a good thing. Obviously you would run this and confirm the text file just to make sure that it went out correctly. For example, if one of those attachments was not found, I would find an error message in here. Alright, so I'm going to check my email now to see if that's come through. So I'll just check, and yes, indeed there is a new email, and there's the two attachment files, and there's the body of the text. So I'll just explain about the body of the text here. So instead of just doing straight text, I've actually specified HTML, so I can also get things like a link or even pictures for branding, for example. So if I go back to my task, there's our batch file, and it referenced a bit of a file called budget message. So I'll just edit that, and you can see that this is a really fundamental HTML page. So it has the HTML tags, and there it's got hi everyone, and then we've got these BRs, which is just doing a new line, and here we have a link to a report in our web channel. So it's not always necessary to attach files to an email if they could just go to the web channel and view the report from there. So I've done both in this example. I've attached some PDFs, and if they click on the link, it'll go off to the report. Now obviously if they're external to the company, they won't probably see that link, so attaching the files would make sense in that case. Okay, up to this point we've been running the batch files directly from the command line so that we can understand how they work and diagnose that the command line is actually working. The next step is to take the batch files and put them into something that you can schedule them at a particular interval. The way we do that is use the Start menu to find a Windows Task Scheduler, and once that you've brought that up, what I usually do is create my own folder in the task scheduled library list. So I've created one called My Tasks, and under there I can start building up my task list to run at various time into. What I'll do is I'll create a new task, just delete that, and I'll delete the email one as well, so we can rebuild those up from scratch. So let's click on Create Basic Task on the Actions pane, and this is the name of the task. So I'm going to say this is Email Reports, and the next is to specify when we'd like to do that. Now I'm just going to say daily, so we're always going to do it at the same time, and we're going to start that in the morning at 7 AM. I'll go next, and what we'd like to do is start a program, and that program is going to be our batch file. So I'm just going to browse for that, and here's my tasks folder where I've put the training T1 send. That's the one with the email command in it. So I'll just select that and go next, and that's basically it. I can now click finish, and now this is scheduled to run every day at 7 AM. For testing purposes, if I wanted to see it run right now, I could just right click on it and select run. And remember that if there's an issue, we can check, for example, that email status text file, and we can also check the event log as well. Now I think it's finished running. I'll just click on the refresh button. No, it's still going. Now tasks also have a historical function, and by default it's off, so I'm just going to double click on this task again. You can see here there's a history tab, and this tells you when the task was run and what sort of status it was. By default that'll be disabled, so I find it quite helpful to enable that. You can come to Actions. If we select the folder and then select Action, we can enable history and disable history. Okay, so that's how you run a task. There's some interesting things about tasks. If we just go back into the properties, you can see that here we've got a number of tabs. I'll just explain what these do. So on general, probably the most important one is this option to run when user is logged on or not. So I usually set that to true, so that even if we've signed out, these emails are going to run. Now there's one thing you need to know about running if you've logged off. Everything will work. For example, publish reports will be rendered as PDF and the emailing will work, but anything that's Excel requires that the user be still logged on. So as long as you're not doing Excel, you're fine. But if you're using Excel, you can never really sign out of Windows and expect it to work. You can lock the user interface, but you can't sign out. So just be aware of that. So I usually set that option, and then on triggers, for example, it's set at 7 AM. If I wanted to do it during the midday as well, I'd do a new and set up another time interval here. So you can do as many of these triggers as you like. And then for actions, well, that's simply the batch file that we wanted to execute, and that you can see there's so many options. Basically those are the only ones that I touch. Every time you change something, you'll be prompted to enter your password again, so it is secure. Alright, so we've created a task and we understand how that works. The next thing is we're going to move on to a more advanced example, which is shown up the top here, and the idea is that we're going to only email out a report when a certain condition is met. So let's have a look at that report. I've created an Excel workbook, and on that workbook I have a number of sheets that I want to send out to the various managers, and one of them is customer aging. So you can see we've got a bit of filter criteria, and there's the balance for the current aged accounts. So if that value there was to exceed 60,000, only then do I want to extract this report and attach it to an email and send it out. The actual email, that when it's sent out, will look like this. So here's a previous one where I've done, and you can see there's my aged customer report, and it's a PDF, and it contains all the graphs and the information that the manager needs to see, including a profit and loss. It also contains a message just telling them that they need to check that part of the report. So this was done conditionally, so we'll work step by step how that was done. Obviously the first step was to actually create this Excel workbook, and the keynote to pay attention to here is this number down at the bottom. So for these account ranges and for this company, we wanted to check that balance, and if that balance exceeded 60,000, send off the reports. So to do that, I've created two tasks. One is the trigger, which is running a query that raises an event in the event log, and then this second task is running if that event exists in the event log. So the way scheduling works conditionally is that the triggers aren't based on time events, they're based on an entry in the Windows event log, and Sharperlight can conditionally create those events. So let's have a look at the query that creates that trigger. I'm going to start up Sharperlight and Query Builder. Now I've saved the file that creates the trigger in the My Tasks folder, so I'm just going to load that file. So I'm going to My Tasks, and here's the file that I've used to define that trigger. So I'm just going to open that, and there's the system that I'm reporting out of. In this case it happens to be Dynamics GP, and I'm going to the customer table, and there's the criteria. And what I'm doing is I'm getting the sum total for the balance, and this is where we create the trigger. So I've created an expression, and if we have a look at the expression, you can see that it's got a function name called event log. And the way I created that expression is I just did a find at the bottom, and I typed in event, or I went to the folder called scheduling and events, and we have a number of templates here. So when you click on the template, you get the basic outline of it. So let's explain what this is doing. So the first one is the condition. So what I've done is I've taken the current output, which is the summed balance, and I've said if it's greater than 60,000. So that's that condition there. The next parameter is the event log ID. So basically when we trigger things, we go by the ID. So you may have a number of triggers in the event log, but I've called this one 1234. So we're going to send the email out only when a new entry for 1234 appears. The next parameter is the source. So this is coming from Sharperlight. I recommend that you just use this same pattern and change the ID number. And then I've got the next part of this is just a message, so that if we looked at the event log, we could see what this was all about. So send report pack, balance for company, and then I've parameterized this. So I've picked up the current filters for whatever company it was, and I've even shown the balance. Right, so that's our trigger query. I'm just going to preview this, and simply by previewing it, it's going to raise the event, and the email is going to go off because we've already got a task that's triggered by this. So I'm just going to preview, and if we have a look at the event log, just refresh this list, we should see a new entry in here. There it is. So there's the event log, and there's our source, Sharperlight, and there's that event ID I was talking about, 1234. You can see that other events, they have different numbers. So the combination of Sharperlight and 123 form was what triggered that email. And here's that body, that description that we created in the expression. Alright, so that's the event. Let's have a look at scheduler. So this scheduled event, it's running the batch file, which contains the trigger, and then the second one, which does the emailing, it has the different type of trigger, which is this. So I'll just recreate that so you can see what's going on. So instead of saying on time, etc., we'll say on a event. And from the drop-down list, we can say, well, what type of event we'd like to drive this task by. And what we should do is always select the application log. Next, the source. Well, the source was going to be Sharperlight. I recommend that you always use Sharperlight. Just selecting from the list. There's Sharperlight, and the event ID was 1234. So that would be how we'd create the trigger for this email. Alright, let's have a look at the two batch files that are behind these two tasks now. So here's the trigger batch file. I'm just going to edit that, and you can see that it's using our path to get to the application.exe. Then it's using /query execute, and then there's our little tilde or top hat, and we put a space, and then there's the XML that we saved that query as. If you're not sure how to save, I'll just go back to Query Builder, which is, there's our trigger definition. What I did was just go save, and then I saved to that file location. So this trigger is quite simple. We just run the report. We don't bother outputting it as anything. We just run it, and that creates the event. Now obviously if the balance isn't above 60,000, then the event's not created and the next batch file never gets triggered. So that was the first batch file, and here's the batch file. Here's the batch file that does the emailing. So this batch file's been triggered, and the first thing it does is it runs that Excel workbook that we saw before, and it saves it as a PDF. So we've got these little top hats here just so we can put it on multiple lines. So here's our parameter that says, look, we want to do all the workbooks, and just for testing purposes I've even specified a count, but if we're using single sign-on, that would be blank, and the password would be blank as well. And I've overridden the company. Didn't have to do that, but I've decided to do it. And then on the next line we've got the send email command, which is similar to what we saw earlier on in this video. So we're sending it from this account to this account, and there's the title, and we've got the message body contained in this external file, and there's our attachment, and we're sending out the status to this customer age email status file. So we can, if anything goes wrong, we can work out if the email is going or not. So the beauty of this is that Task Scheduler will run this every hour or once a day, and if those conditions are true, then the email gets sent out with the attachments. So we're not spamming the managers with emails when there's nothing to action. Let's move on to the next part of this video, where we'll look at how to save a Excel workbook or some other content to the file system, but have that file appear in the web channel. This is a good way of taking a very heavy report that may take some time to calculate and to schedule it in the morning or late at night, so that it can take as much time as it likes, and then when someone comes into the web channel, they can view the report straight away without any extraction time at all. So this URL address is actually coming out of Sharperlight's web channel. So let's have a look at how this is done. Now, in previous examples you saw how we ran a batch file or command line and it's saved to a folder under My Tasks, for example, and that folder was called Outputs, and there's our PDF files, etc. Now we can't use this location for the web channel. We need a more secure location, and that location is on the application server. So I know to date we're assuming that you've been running this locally on your machine, not the application server itself, but now to publish content we need to actually put it where the service is running, which is the Sharperlight application server. So on that machine you'll have C drive, for example, and then a folder called Program Data. If you have a look in Program Data, there'll be a folder called Sharperlight, and then you'll find a folder called Service Resources. Under Service Resources there'll be a Published folder. So from the URL address we can actually reference and display files in that folder. So here's an example where we have Sharperlight, and then we have /content, and then file equals, and then this keyword called publisher, dir, and that allows us to reference content in that folder. So if there was a file in there we would be able to see it. Now because it's on the application server and you may be scheduling this from your client, what you need to be able to do is share that folder so that you can save files into it, and of course permissions may have to be set as well. So here's that directory structure again. So Program Data, Sharperlight, Services, Resources, Publish. So what you do is you share that folder. So I'm just going to go to Properties and you set up Share, and you can specify the accounts that have access to that folder. Now if you didn't want to share that folder but you wanted to separate it out, you could do that as well. So in my example I've created a My Reports folder, and what I'm going to do is when I run the command lines I'm going to store the outputs in this folder. And just as I was saying before, come into Properties and you share that with the designated users. So you could have a subset of accounts that are allowed to write into that folder. This is a good way of distributing the load that would be on normally on the application server. So you could have a number of PCs around the office that have access to this shared location. So I've shared Publish and My Reports. I recommend that you do your own separate folder, and so once you've shared those you should be able to go back to your local PC and have a look at the network, and my PC, this application server is called Sharperlight PC, and there's that shared folder, and you can see there's the address to the folder. So I've prepared a number of batch files. So here's the first one, Publish A. So I'm just going to edit that, and you can see it's very similar to what we've done to date, where we're taking an Excel workbook, but this time I'm saving to that shared file folder location which I got from the Explorer. So there's the network location and the folder, so I'm putting it into there. The end result of that is that then once the file is in there you can use this syntax here. I'm just going to make that a little bit larger so you can see it on the screen. So this is the syntax. So this is the important part. So we have /content, and then we have file equals, and there's our keyword underscore publish dir, and then we put the dot, so that'll come up a folder, and then we can come back into my reports, and then there's the name of the file. And if we do that, of course out comes the file. So I'll just change that and we can have a look at the other one, which is the Gantt chart. I've typed in the wrong file name here, so obviously you can't find that, so I'll just go back to the file system and have a look for the correct file name. I'm not running these batch files now because you've seen how that works. Once the file's created in that right location, we can access it through the web channel. Now, putting this URL link like this directly to the report is a good way of bringing up the report, but usually what you'd want to do is wrap this as a published report. So I'll just show you how that's done. So I'll come back into Publisher, and I've pre-prepared a few examples. So this is the budgets report, so I've just given it a code and a group, and normally what you do is you'd create a query. I've just created a dummy query here. But instead of displaying that, what I've done is come to the Report tab, and there's something called Custom HTML. So basically what we're going to do is take that link to the report and wrap it in an iframe. So here's one I prepared earlier, and you can see it's very simple HTML. As you can see, it's very simple HTML where we have an iframe, and the important part here is that URL address. So I haven't hard-coded the base address for the URL because that may change when you deploy to other services. I've used this variable called URL root, and I've got that from the references and that tag line there. So I've just replaced the start of that URL address, and the rest is content and file equals, and there's our special command, publish dir, and there's the folder location. Now if I was to delete all this and come in fresh, I'd get a basic template that would look like this. So all I've done is gone through and deleted the sections I didn't need and just left the iframe section and taken out this name here. So I've just got a basic iframe, and where it says source and it's blank in there, that's where I pasted in the URL address. Given that, what we can do is now come in and select the link for that report and paste that into the URL address, and now we've got the link already embedded. If you wanted to take these files and save them automatically so that the user can click on a link and have them saved to their file system, I'll just go back to the original URL address. So here we have the content variation, and the documentation on the /content can be found in the help section of the index page for the RESTful service. So there's our file equals publish dir, and what I could do is put on the end of it ampersand save as, and then the file name, for example xxx, and instead of displaying the PDF we get a prompt to save it as that particular file name. Okay, saving PDFs and pushing them out through the web channel is quite simple, but when it comes to HTML content it's a little bit more complicated, because HTML pages, if there is graphs, etc., there's more than one file. So we need to take some extra precautions to push out HTML content to the web channel. So we'll have a look at those extra steps that we need to do. So here's, just like the PDF, we've got a link using content file equals, and there's our HTML page. Now this is working, but you can see that it's got multiple pages going across the bottom, and we can link to those pages, and it also has graphs as well. Now for this to work, we need to get Sharperlight to adjust the links in all those files, and that can only happen if it's not in your own folder but in that publish folder. So let's just go back to those public locations. So remember we shared them out. There's the publish folder. So if we want to have HTML that has multiple pages, for example this customer age report, there's the HTML, but it has all the graphs and pictures in this subfolder here. So Sharperlight needs to adjust this page and all the links in it. And the way that's done is by prefixing the name of the output file with cache_excel_. So let's have a look at the batch file that did that. Second batch file here, and you can see that it's pretty standard. It's taking our Excel Workbook. There's our little hat symbol to say this is multiple line, and then we have a space on the front here. So there's our Excel Workbook, and we're saving to that network shared location, and we're saving it as HTML, and we're specifying all the workbooks, and we've prefixed it with cache_excel_, and that's going to tell Sharperlight that yes, this is a multiple page HTML file and all the links need to be adjusted. If we didn't do that and just saved it as HTML without this prefix, what would happen is we would see the HTML page, but things like the links to the graphs, for example, they would just come up as broken links. I'll just come back to the second part of the command line. After saving the HTML to the published shared folder, there's a second line here, and what that's doing is it's updating the last modified date on the HTML file. Now this is important because anything that's saved in this location, Sharperlight is going to look at that modified date, and if it's earlier than now, it's going to automatically clean up the files. So what I've done is I've downloaded a simple program called File Touch, which allows you to change the date modified stamp on the file. So that way this file won't be cleaned up for a year, for example, until I've regenerated it. So the download location for File Touch is this web page here, and again it's free. So a very simple program. So without doing that, what would happen would be, after we've generated that HTML file, if we use the service for any length of time, it would automatically be cleaned up. So setting that date is quite important. Also, if you reset the service, these files will be cleaned up as well, no matter what date you set here. So you may have to rerun that job if the service is restarted. Okay, we're coming towards the end of the video now, so we'll look at some more scenarios. Here's Publisher, and let's say that we had a very heavy report that takes some time to calculate. So in those scenarios, you would turn on caching. For example, this report should be run and kept for at least 1 day. So what happens is that the first person hitting the report takes the hit, the report's extracted, and then its output is saved for the next person that comes along. But obviously what you'd want to do is schedule this so that it runs in the morning and it's kept for example 1 day, and it's not re-extracted again. So for those reasons, on the caching tab there's this task scheduler command line, and what that does is it builds up a command line for you that you can then put into Windows Task Scheduler and via a batch file, and then run that at whatever interval you like. So the end result is that someone comes to the web page and all the results are pre-extracted. And if there were, for example, different companies or cost centers, you could even put in the parameters for those so that you create multiple pre-cached result sets, so that the pages come up immediately. So that's caching on Publisher. So here's Materialized Queries, and I've just created a simple data mart. So you can see here I've created a simple data warehouse, and in there could be quite a few different tables that need to be refreshed. The idea about Materialized Queries is that going to the live system is too slow, so you can bring out the data from multiple systems, store it in these tables, and then have these scheduled to be updated at whatever interval you specify. So let's have a look at this one here, and there's a scheduling tab, And just like in Publisher, we can get a command line that will allow us to refresh this at whatever interval we like. So we just take that command line, put it in a batch file, and then hook it up to Windows Task Scheduler. So in closing, let's have a look at some other exotic uses for command lines. So here's one where we're doing writebacks. So normally you do writebacks with the web channel or through Excel, where you press a button and write back a journal, for example, or a new budget information. But by using the command line, instead of going via Excel, we could take something like a CSV file and push, for example, journal entries back through that way. So that's quite an interesting use for command lines as well. So let's just revise what we've learnt here. So command lines work mostly by calling the md.applications.exe from Sharperlight, and then it has commands like Excel export or query execute, and then there are a number of parameters, and usually the parameters are some sort of input file and some sort of output file. These are all recorded in the Windows event log, and the source will usually be prefixed with Sharperlight so that we can see when they were executed, and for example, if a file was missing, some sort of error message would appear in here. We learnt that we can save the command lines in batch files, and if you create a folder with all your batch files, these can be run on your local machine. They don't need to be on the application server, and that way we can take the load away from the application server and also get around problems like having no access to the application server. So we learned that we can create batch files, and if we download some extra tools, we can send emails out as well and attach files. These batch files can be combined with Windows Task Scheduler, and they can be run at any specified interval, and we can also have Sharperlight queries defined that conditionally raise events, which then trigger tasks in Windows Task Scheduler as well. We also learned how to publish content to the web channel by putting them into special folders, so that even though we're in the web channel, those reports can be pre-rendered at a specified interval and then viewed as static reports in the web channel. We also learnt that when running command lines, setting up single sign-on is quite important. So in Site Setup, we can specify our Windows domain account or local account and have that trusted, so that we don't need to provide account details on the command line as well. As you can see, command lines are very useful, and when combined with things like task scheduling, they become even more useful. This video is by no means a complete list of all the uses of command lines, but hopefully you'll find this helpful.